Hello again and welcome to our 60 Minutes podcast, Extra Minutes. My name is Dimity Clancey and joining me today is our producer, Serge Negus. Welcome, Serge.
Good to be back, mate.
Happy New Year.
Likewise.
So today we're going to do things a little bit different than what we usually do for our podcast, but it's not different for our program here at 60. You might remember many, many years ago, our program would always end with a segment called Peter Harvey's Mailbag. I used to love the segment, and it was the viewer's opinion. It was
Exactly.
it was the reaction to the story. So it was always a really intriguing segment and part of the program. Let's take a look.
Why don't we just give up on the war on drugs? I mean, after watching Liz Hayes' report last week on the endless supply of synthetic legal drugs hitting the market, what's the point? Most of you were appalled. I cried watching this. My son's in a mental hospital for the second time this year from using these drugs. That parasite needs stopping, and parents should band together to stop him and the other dealers from making money. On the other hand, I find it very disturbing that so many drugs are condemned. Marijuana is illegal, and yet alcohol and prescription medicines are handed out like perfectly acceptable lollies. Laws are out of control, but we just accept them. Wake up.
In particular, today we're going to be talking about nitazines. And I think, Serge, if we can just start by what are nitazines and why are they a concern?
Yeah, so they're a group of synthetic opioids that have come out in the last sort of 5 to 10 years, and they are 1,000 times stronger than morphine. So like much stronger than fentanyl, which people might know about. They're just in a class of their own. They are so strong. Experts we talked to when we did this story in 2024 were just blown away by how dangerous the drug market now is because of these drugs. Like, you need the smallest amount to just end a life. It's quite phenomenal.
And they're turning up everywhere. It's not just your cocaine, your MDMA, people, who are taking that element of risk. They're also turning up in things like sleeping pills.
Exactly, yeah. And we've seen deaths in Australia where kids, went online as kids do these days and bought what they thought were anti-anxiety medication or sleeping pills, like you say, and they were laced with the tiniest amounts of nitazines, and they just died in their sleep, and then their parents woke up in the morning and found their body. It's horrific.
So far, there have been 32 deaths here in Australia caused by nitazines. The latest death was in Queensland in October last year. And we talked to a mum in our story who lost her son back in 2021 after he had bought heroin online in the mail, and it was laced with nitazines. But he had no idea. He thought he was taking what he was used to, a safe amount of heroin, but in fact, it was laced with the deadly drug.
Exactly. And I mean, the thing that's like, I think people might comment that, it's his fault. He was a drug addict. He was taking heroin. But again, the thing that you've got to contextualize with this is that nitazines are 500 times stronger than heroin. So, and he had no idea. And so there needs to be a bit of empathy and understanding around this, which is what that mother was trying to tell us in his case, and trying to warn people that, there are people out there that may have kids that are addicted to drugs, but this drug is in a whole nother world, and we really need to be conscious of that and the strength.
And I think with nitazines, it's the unknown of it. You're not taking what you think you're taking. And when you hear people like Dr. Marianne Juancy, who runs the Safe Injecting Room in King's Cross in Sydney, for her to say that what we're seeing at the moment is the most unstable drug market that she has ever seen. Now, these are people who are experts in this field that work, and advocate in this space, and they're worried. I always think it's a concern when the person in your story, like those people, say that they're worried, then there's a problem. What have you seen change when it comes to the illicit drug market in recent years?
What we're seeing at the moment in Australia is probably the most unstable drug market that we've ever seen. It's unprecedented. We're seeing new and emerging substances coming on the market. We've got more drug alerts out at the moment than I think we've almost ever had.
That unstable market is another way of saying the most dangerous drug market they've ever seen. And like you say, they're experts and they were genuinely concerned. And I think we need to take heed of that.
Of course, whenever you talk about drugs, there's an element of fear and debate, and I think the reaction, which we're going to talk about today, the reaction to this story was huge. And it comes from all avenues of the debate. You've got the people that are just blanket, why take drugs, don't take them. People who have sympathy, people who don't have sympathy, people who have complex addiction. So let's unpack it and go through some of the comments. I think, that a lot of people that commented on our social media. So we're referring to, social media these days, Facebook, Instagram. How about you just don't take drugs? That blanket term, that non-sympathetic, that you hear so often. And I was always taught growing up, just don't take drugs.
Yeah, and I guess that doesn't necessarily take into factor, the socioeconomic reasons for why some people have addictions, or the trauma reasons why some people have addictions, which is Dr. Mary Jauncey's key point. She talks about how a lot of the people that she sees in her clinic are people who've had sexual assaults when they were children, these types of things. And so I think what a lot of the experts say in our story is we've got to be a bit more empathetic when it comes to who drug users are, and not just write them off necessarily, and to understand that those addictions are a lot more complex than simply a decision to not do drugs. It's a lot more to it than that, they say.
And also talking about it, also prompts comments like fear-mongering much, and I guess this story helped to expose, how bad Australia's drug problem really is.
Totally. And I mean, I would say to that person, like all of the experts that we had on our show wanted to do this story because they are so concerned and so scared about what these drugs, nitazines, are going to do in the drug market. They wanted to get this story out there. It wasn't fear-mongering in any way. They really wanted to highlight that.
And I think one of the other really big concerns for this story was the access now with online, and that would be something that has evolved over the years, is the easy access to nitazines. I mean, we saw it for ourselves during our investigation. We got online and we contacted a dealer in China, and within minutes they responded to our request and were happy to send $7,000 worth of nitazines in express post from China to Sydney.
Hello.
Hi, how are you? I'm just wondering, how will you send it to me?
By express.
Express post? How will you package it?
Package. Where are you from?
Australia.
The video cuts out, but the seller asks to continue messaging.
Have you sent to Australia before? How do you make sure it gets through customs? It's a big order.
And at that point in time, the substance of nitazines hadn't even been banned for manufacturing in China. It was only after we did that story that they did actually ban and list nitazines and drugs like nitazines as a banned substance to make, which is wild to think. And even in Australia, they hadn't classified them properly at that point in time. Now, luckily, China have gone and actually banned nitazines as a substance. But again, the ease at which we were able to do that was frightening.
And that the sentiment was definitely there. Here's another comment, very worrisome, how readily available, horribly dangerous drugs are easily available. I guess as a parent as well, and I think Claire, Dylan Rocher, who lost his life in 2021 in England, his mum Claire saying, there's TikTok videos now that you can go on and just put your order in and it's sent to you. And she saw the mail come and be delivered to her door, and her son was a musician, so she just thought it was records, or he got mail and post all the time, as young people do, but yet these packages of heroin were turning up in the letterbox.
Well, I mean, that's something all parents should really consider in this day and age, is that through social media, the amount of drugs that are being sold in places like TikTok and Instagram, and in Dylan Rush's case, there's a great story in the UK looking at how SoundCloud was facilitating some of that as a social media network. So you don't know. It's not like back in the day, your kid goes down to the train station and picks up some drugs from a dealer, and you can maybe see that interaction, or it's impossible to monitor your child online these days. And so I think it's understanding that would help people get a grip of why this is such a dangerous scenario that needs to be monitored properly.
And this is where it gets interesting, because, as a parent, I just say, oh my God, I just don't want my kids to ever touch anything dangerous, don't take risks, don't do any of that. But the people in our story, the experts in our story, were saying, well, hey, prohibition is not the answer.
Exactly.
It hasn't worked in the past.
Yeah.
They want to work with the problem.
Exactly. Prohibition, according to all the experts in our story, just never works. It's like you say, it just ends up in a scenario where it drives the market deeper underground, makes it harder to authorities to actually track down and stop the people creating it. And in this scenario, with the internet, has made the drugs more accessible.
This is always an interesting angle for this. And this is one that Claire, Dylan's mother, would probably get quite offended at, that, people are arguing that this is self-inflicted, hence it's their problem. One person, Julie, said, regardless of the warnings, people will take drugs, so it's on them. Taking drugs long-term is a death sentence, so it will just happen a little faster.
It's very harsh. There's not much empathy in that. I think that in Claire's scenario with her son Dylan, really we're in a society now where a lot of people have complex psychological problems and mental health issues, and drugs are often an outlet for those types of people, and the treatment for them and the mental health treatment for them is not available. And especially now, if you look at it, the cost of being able to get mental health treatment for things like anxiety, and any other psychological issue are so high now that, like other children we've seen in Australia, they've turned to the black market online to try and get themselves anti-anxiety medication. Like it's just a lot more complicated than that, which is what we discovered in our story talking to these experts.
And certainly those sort of comments would be very hard to take when you're sitting in Claire's position.
It would be, yeah, it would be.
You
Because
know,
it can happen to anyone as well.
Well, and she woke up in the morning and he was unresponsive. And like, can you imagine doing that to your
It's
child?
horrific.
Like finding your child in their bed, unresponsive, and then the ambulance, she said, walked downstairs and said, I'm so sorry, there's nothing we can do.
He's gone, yeah.
What he took, he thought he was safe in taking. He'd taken that amount before. He thought he'd be okay, and he wasn't. But he was ultimately killed by a silent killer that neither of us knew about, and he would never have known it was there. And the tiniest amount can be fatal.
Then, people defending pill testing and all of those measures that could be put into place to make drug taking safer. I mean, that's a whole nother facet of this topic.
And again, a lot of the experts in our story just say that harm reduction is not a tool that we should just get rid of just because we don't necessarily agree with drug taking. Like, if we want to conserve life here, if we don't want people dying, it should just be one of the tools that we're able to use to prevent deaths, and that no death is justified, whether it's from drugs or anything else. And so I think a lot of the experts in our story would argue very hard that it's just something that we need to be able to have available to be able to care for the public.
I thought it was really interesting when we went to Canberra and we spoke to Professor Malcolm McLeod, who's from the Australian National University, who received, they looked like coffee granules. Do you remember that little sachet of nitazines that came in one Friday night to the pill testing clinic in Canberra? And I mean, that machinery just looked like a spaceship. But it so quickly was able to identify nitazines. And, he categorically says that in itself, being able to identify that very potent drug very, very quickly with the machinery that they had saved lives that weekend, because
100%.
they, within hours of that, coming into the lab, they knew what they were dealing with.
And they were able to put out warnings to people. And, that's invaluable in saving lives if that's something that you morally agree with, I guess. And he was just adamant that it's the speed at which they could do that is vital. It's vital.
And then, there's always the other side where people will say, well, it's the green light. If you're going to give people the green light to take drugs, if you're going to offer pill testing.
Totally. It's a moral conundrum.
Let's read some of the comments from there. This will cause more deaths at music concerts because of not having pill testing, which is very sad.
And I mean, if you look at Queensland, there was a death from nitazines after they got rid of the pill testing. So it's, that argument potentially holds true. But then again, the green light, like you say, it's a challenging scenario.
I think the other, thing that came out of this investigation is that drug addiction is a really complex thing. And, as Marianne Juancy would say, is it's about keeping people safe at the end of the day, regardless of how you got there. If you're there taking drugs, then it's the best thing is to keep them safe.
Why do we wait until the overdoses have happened? Why do we wait until the deaths have happened? Surely it makes sense to put information and power in the hands of people, give them information about what they're using.
That must be incredibly frustrating for you.
Beyond frustrating, actually, when you know that lives are at stake.
I think the other interesting thing in this story as well that we uncovered is that a lot of these people aren't actually your traditional drug addicts. Like, people associate drug overdoses generally with people who are addicted to heroin and ice and nitazines whilst they're in the synthetic opioid class. The people who are dying from this are not that classic drug addict that you're thinking of. And I think that raises a lot of questions for people to consider. It's like, okay, like, if this is just any regular knockabout family where these lives are being lost, maybe we do need to consider some of the different health measures and the preventative measures like pill testing, because we do already have safe injecting clinics, but this is a whole new market, and this is why Marianne Juancy talked about how it's the most unstable market she's ever seen, because it's capturing...
Well, it's infiltrating, more and more of society.
It's infiltrating everyone, which is so scary.
A comment about drug addiction. Can't they just go into nature and enjoy the sounds and not wreck their brains? They are not invincible.
Definitely.
How sad.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that nature is a great drug, so I back that.
And some sympathy, a lot of simple-minded fools commenting their worthless comments about addicts as if they know. People have, all sorts of journeys as to why they might end up taking drugs.
And the drug debate always brings out the most vastly different range of opinions.
Back to the solutions, naloxone was a word that kept coming up, and we touched on quite in detail in our story. Naloxone is what you take or what is given to someone when they've overdosed and can reverse the overdose. The experts in our story, Dr. Paul McCartney, who's treated, people with drug addiction for decades, would say that every single one of us needs to have naloxone in our glove box, in our cabinet at home, in case we come across someone who has overdosed.
Or if you're a parent and a kid comes home and overdoses.
The rules in Australia are that anybody can access this from a pharmacy. In the way that we talk about people knowing CPR or responding to somebody who collapses with a cardiac arrest with the defibrillator devices, this is an equivalent for a heart attack. This is for people who have an opioid overdose. If you have it in your home, it's something that can be there if heaven forbid, something goes wrong and people overdose. It can give people the power to bring people back to life.
What was scary though was finding out about how when someone overdoses on nitazines, usually if you have naloxone for a heroin overdose or even a fentanyl overdose, you just need one dose to essentially recover. Whereas with nitazines, they're so strong that you need 4 or 5 of them, which is just absolutely freaky.
And that, advocate Caitlin Dooley, who was in our story, said that she was there on the night that those Red Bull pills were being handed. People thought they were buying MDMA, but they were laced with nitazines. She said, one person, you'd give someone naloxone, half an hour later they'd go downhill again and they needed another dose. So
scary.
So all of these people needed to be transported to hospital. All of them needed intravenous naloxone in order to survive, and all of them did.
Well, look at that. The war on drugs is not working. How about another approach, legalising them, ? Similar to what Portugal has done?
Portugal's decriminalised them though, haven't they? Not legalised them?
Yeah, and that's a whole nother avenue. I mean, Canberra has done the same thing here.
Yeah, they have. Yeah. I think, whilst there can be arguments for and against the war on drugs, I think ultimately the balance here is what our experts are talking about in this story. They're not advocating extreme avenues to deal with these issues. They're advocating reason. I think that came across really strongly in our story, which is why it's so important to look at this as the complex issue that it is, and not go to polarised sides with it.
And it was interesting that both representatives from Border Force and the Australian Federal Police said no at first. I think eventually the Federal Police came on board and did an interview, some weeks later after our program first aired.
Well, they were quite honest about how difficult it is for them to be able to actually pick up how many drugs are coming in. Just because of how vast our borders are, and the challenge that presents. And so I think there's something to take stock from with that, and realising that, law enforcement isn't the only solution to this problem. It needs to be a combined effort between health authorities and preventative measures and law enforcement in order to get the best outcome for society, I think.
This is interesting in relation to naloxone. This is why naloxone should be spoken about in high schools, news, etc., etc. They talk about the threat, but what about the one thing that can help stop an overdose? It's effing free.
On that note, I mean, if schools aren't talking to kids about nitazines right now, that is a problem.
And I think at the end of the day, there are so many, as we said, angles to this debate and opinions, and I think it will always divide society. But one of the scary things and the takeaway for me was that there's no grip on this problem of nitazines right now. I don't feel like anybody, the experts, law enforcement, anybody really has a grip on what is being done or what can be done to make it safer and to stop this from coming, further and further into Australia.
Absolutely. And I think that's why they're advocating for this idea of we shouldn't take anything off the table when it comes to dealing with this problem. We should just come together on it, and everyone needs awareness, and that's what they were trying to do.
And as Dr. Marianne Juancy said, it's at the end of the day, it's about fear and making sure that everybody comes home at the end of the day. So That's really at the heart of this problem.
Absolutely.
Well, Serge, thank you so much for coming on. And as always, we love to hear your opinions and thoughts on our programs here at 60 Minutes. And if you missed our investigation into nitazines, you can catch it on our 60 Minutes YouTube page and 9 Now. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.